is really tracking the statistics and passing along the information that we learn to folks such as yourselves, as well as local health departments and our legislators. So I'm happy to be here tonight to share what I know with you about H1N1 flu. And oftentimes we hear it's just the flu. And the question I'm going to pose tonight is, well, it is and it isn't. And I want to just let you know a little bit about what I know about H1N1 flu. But first I'd like to start with talking about influenza in general and what is influenza. And it's an illness that is sudden in onset. It produces a fever. It's caused by an influenza virus or an infection with an influenza virus. It's highly infectious. It spreads from person to person very quickly. And not all strains of influenza cause the same types of illness. Sometimes you can have a mild influenza or you can have a severe influenza. So not all strains are the same. Some of the symptoms of influenza include a fever, plus a cough or a sore throat. You can also have a headache. You can have achy muscles, severe weakness, difficulty breathing. Sometimes people experience even vomiting and diarrhea. For the most part, if you've ever had the flu, you probably felt like you've been run over by a truck. I mean, it's really a pretty debilitating illness while you have it. So it's important to understand how influenza spreads from person to person, because a lot of the recommendations that we make for protecting yourself or protecting others is related to the spread of how the disease spreads from one person to another. And it's typically said that it's spread by respiratory droplets, which are illustrated very well in this picture. When an individual talks, coughs, or sneezes, you see the respiratory droplets come out from a person's mouth, and those droplets contain virus, influenza virus, if someone is infected. If you breathe in these droplets or touch surfaces that the droplets fall on and they're contaminated with flu viruses, and you touch your nose or your mouth, those are ways you can get infected with flu. Now, you often hear about seasonal influenza. Influenza and viruses are circulating all the time among humans, and they can infect individuals at any time or any month during the year. But flu season is really referred to as this regularly occurring time period characterized by outbreaks of influenza. Flu season occurs usually during the cold half of the year in each hemisphere. So when we're having our winter and flu season, the southern hemisphere is having summer, and when we're in the summer months, the southern hemisphere is experiencing flu season during their winter months. So we learn a lot about the flu, and we've learned a lot about H1N1 by looking at what happened in the southern hemisphere during this past flu season that's just ending. In Connecticut flu season, or in the United States, it usually encompasses the months of October through April. And during a typical year in the United States, about 5 to 20% of the population becomes sick with seasonal flu. There are about 36,000 related deaths every year in the United States. Most people have some type of natural immunity to the flu, the seasonal flu. They've seen it before, their body remembers it, so maybe they're able to fight it off a little bit better. But there is a seasonal flu vaccine available. It's available now, and it's recommended, like with all vaccines, if you want to prevent illness and infection, to get your seasonal flu shot. Now I'd like to turn our attention to really the topic of the night, which is 2009 H1N1 influenza. This is also known as swine flu, novel H1N1 influenza, or pandemic H1N1 influenza. All of these terms refer to exactly the same thing, this new flu virus. This is a new flu virus. It's spreading very quickly from person to person. The first outbreaks of illnesses occurred in Mexico earlier this year. The first cases in the United States of human infection with 2009 H1N1 influenza viruses were detected in April of this past year in San Diego and Imperial County, California, and in Guadalupe County in Texas. A report describing these first U.S. cases was published in a CDC weekly magazine. That's the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's weekly magazine. The title of the newsletter is MMWR. It stands for Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Reports. And when you're an epidemiologist and you work in any kind of disease surveillance, you read this fairly out in the MMWR on April 21st. 2 days after the CDC report was published, the New York City Health Department began investigating reports of an outbreak of influenza-like illness at a prep school in Queens. You may remember reading about this in the newspapers, seeing it on the news. Suddenly, this outbreak of a new influenza virus was closer to home for those of us working in public health in Connecticut. So 2 days later, after learning of these 3 new unique cases of flu, we had it right at our doorstep. Within days, reports of influenza-like illnesses in Connecticut residents reached our offices. Residents who had recent travel to Mexico were among the first cases that we investigated and that were reported to us. However, widespread illness among students and schools soon followed, and I think you might all remember last spring and all of the hoopla about students getting sick, including this report that's referenced in this newspaper article, illnesses among students who returned from a field trip to Washington, D.C., and they came back, and along with having a nice time, they also brought flu. This new virus, again, was spreading rapidly from person to person. This is just an example of one of the many school outbreaks that occurred in Connecticut during the spring. So what does it look like worldwide? Well, oftentimes we refer to this outbreak of this new virus as a pandemic. And a pandemic is just an epidemic or an outbreak of illness that has spread through many countries, and this one has spread across the globe. And this map was downloaded. Excuse me?
No, nothing. Just thinking out loud.
This map was I downloaded this a couple days ago, and it shows the current status in the world of the new 2001 H1N1 influenza virus. It's indicated in blue circles on this map, and the red circles indicate other flu viruses or seasonal viruses that have also been detected during this past week. It's actually September 14th through 20th. So you see a lot of new virus spreading very quickly. Again, this started in April or earlier this year, and it has spread worldwide at this point in time.
What is the numbers?
Actually, they're not really counting. I don't know. I don't know how many laboratory tests, but they've stopped counting numbers because so many people are coming down with the flu that it doesn't really matter. All of the people who are developing the flu, only a small proportion of them are actually being tested for it, and that proportion is used for surveillance, so we can come up with information such as this. And so I don't really have the numbers. We're just tracking. These are laboratory reports. Again, worldwide. The epidemiology of the disease caused by H1N1 in the southern hemisphere is very similar to what we saw last spring in the northern hemisphere. There have been no significant changes detected in the virus structure, isolated from persons in the southern hemisphere as compared to viruses isolated from people in the northern hemisphere. So it looks like the same virus, and it's coming back. This is a map that shows the United States as of the last week in September. There have been 27 states shown here in the darker brown color that are reporting widespread influenza activity at this time. This is very unusual to have influenza circulating like this in the United States in September. You might notice that the northeast states are lighter colored, and that's because we haven't seen as much flu activity as our southern states have seen. That's for the moment. We're seeing flu, but to a much lesser extent. We expect that to change very soon over the coming weeks.
Is this the common flu, not the...
This right now is H1N1 flu. There is no seasonal flu circulating right now. This is all H1N1 flu. As you can see from the graph back here, all of the blue, that's H1N1 flu. There's no seasonal flu circulating in the United States, and that will change as well. But right now we're talking about all H1N1 flu. The flu viruses, as I said, remain similar to what we saw in the springtime, and they remain susceptible to